Another country says it's ready to recognise Palestinian statehood. This time, it's Canada. Donald Trump says that now threatens the trade negotiations he is doing with Ottawa. We'll discuss the consequences and whether this leaves America quite isolated on the world stage in this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and we are recording this episode on the afternoon of Thursday, the 31st of July. But on Wednesday night, Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, became the latest world leader to say that he was preparing to recognise a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly in September. And similar to Keir Starmer, when he did something similar on Tuesday in the UK, Mark Carney attached some conditions to Canada's policy. And that's had some knock-on consequences because as sure as night followed day, there was a post on Truth Social from Donald Trump, which was very critical or implicitly critical of Canada's position, and also sort of made a threat about what it could mean for the economic relationship between the US and Canada, and in particular, the negotiations over a trade deal to avoid those massive tariffs. So there's lots to unpick here and lots of consequences to brainstorm about, and we can do that now because we're joined on the line from Westminster by Alex Forsyth. Hello again, Alex.
Hello, Adam.
In Washington is Gary O'Donoghue, Chief North America Correspondent. Hello, Gary.
Hi, Adam.
And please welcome from Ottawa, he's the Canada policy reporter for Politico. It's Mike Blanchfield. Hi, Mike.
Morning, everybody.
Well, morning for you. It's 20 to 5 in the afternoon here in the UK, but that just proves that this is real. So, Mike, just first of all, give us the basics then. The pledge about Palestinian statehood that has been given by Mark Carney, it amounts to what? What's the details?
Well, Carney says this will be something Canada will follow through on next month at the UN General Assembly. And he's put a couple of conditions on that, one of them being that Hamas can no longer be a part of a future Palestinian state. And he's had a lengthy conversation with Mahmoud Abbas in which he says he's received assurances about good governance practices and future elections and that sort of thing, and that Canada will provide resources to help them with that. But the Hamas part of that condition seems to be problematic for Canada. I mean, that's not something Carney or Canada controls or anybody really controls. But of course, it has this morning angered Donald Trump, who has now tied that to the trade talks and said, wow, this is going to make it really hard to get a deal with Canada. He posted on Truth Social and, big exclamation marks and capital letters, "Oh, Canada."
And Gary, just brainstorm for us then what the consequences could be for the US-Canada relationship as a result of this.
Well, it's a problematic relationship, as we know, ever since Donald Trump said he wanted to make Canada the 51st state. And other sort of, in a sense, attacks on Canada's sovereignty. As Mike was saying there, seems to have tied it to the trade negotiation, so turned what was a kind of economic discussion into a political discussion, which is what he's also done, incidentally, with Brazil and the issues over trade discussions there. But I think for the US, there is a problem here. This is more than symbolic. Its key allies, a number of its key allies, including Canada now, UK and France, have signed up to this idea. It means it's the only country on the UN Security Council, only one of the permanent five, that now is not heading towards recognizing Palestinian statehood. And I think it lays bare the fact that really there doesn't seem at this stage to be a post-conflict foreign policy from the US in terms of what happens in Gaza. They say ceasefire, hostages, feed the population. But what's the governance afterwards? And we haven't really heard anything beyond those early days when Donald Trump talked about turning it into the Riviera of the Middle East.
And is there any sign that America's moving into a position where it's willing to discuss those things?
No, I don't think there is. I mean, Steve Witkoff, the envoy, is in Israel at the moment. The talks broke down in Doha last week. Israel and the US pulled their delegations out. They're trying to get things going in. There is some sign that Donald Trump is putting some kind of pressure on Israel in terms of, talking about, like he did in Scotland, like about starvation, which is something that Israel rejects as being a fact on the ground in Gaza. So that is a form of pressure. But don't forget, in response to these moves from Paris and London and Ottawa, the US government has also slapped a whole bunch of new visa restrictions on members of the Palestinian Authority and the PLO as a way of saying, well, you may be doing this, but we're not convinced that these people are going to be part of any future.
And Alex, I'll come to you in a second, but to just ask about some of the echoes with Keir Starmer's position and some of the differences. But Mike, just before we do that, what is it about Mark Carney's view of the world and Canada's place in it that means he's done this in this way?
He said when Trump came to power, or when he came to power to counter the Trump threat to Canada, that he called the relationship with the U.S. over the way it traditionally has been. And first thing he did as Prime Minister is travel to Britain and France to reestablish relations with what he called our traditional reliable allies. And Carney has said that, in this new world where it's over and with the U.S. we have to renegotiate a new economic and security deal, we're going to work with these reliable allies to build, a new world order or the next world order or new alliances, and Canada will play its role. So by aligning with Britain and France primarily on this, he's being consistent in how he sees the worldview for Canada moving forward. And it's, obviously negotiating with Trump as best as he can to get the best deal he can for Canada, but also looking transatlantic, basically, to the countries that were the two founding colonial powers of Canada.
And Alex, Downing Street has since clarified, since we were chatting on Tuesday's podcast after the Prime Minister had done his news conference about recognising a Palestinian state at the UN in September if Israel hadn't met certain conditions. Then over the last few days, they've had to clarify the Palestinian side of that equation.
It's interesting because I think obviously the decision by Canada to say that they are now very clearly on this pathway to recognising a Palestinian state, I think is something that Downing Street had hoped when it made its announcement, because we saw France first, then of course we saw the UK, and now we're seeing Canada. And I think that they had hoped that there would be this sort of ramping up of international pressure all along those same lines. But there are marked differences between the approach that each of those countries have taken when it comes to the way that they are setting out the path, as they might see it, to Palestinian statehood or recognising Palestinian statehood. So we heard from Keir Starmer, him saying, look, we will recognise a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly in September unless Israel changes course. So, for example, allows more UN aid into Gaza, agrees a ceasefire, and then there was talk about a longer-term peace process. From Mark Carney, what we heard was more of a focus on, he was saying that there had to be a democratisation of the Palestinian Authority, a demilitarisation. So it seemed on the face of it, when you look at it, or at least one of the criticisms that Downing Street has faced, was that the conditions that they were attaching were related to Israel. So Palestinian statehood was dependent on the actions of Israel. Whereas if you look at, on the face of it, what Mark Carney was saying, it was much more caveated on the changes that needed to be made to the Palestinian Authority and talking about future governance, for example. And so I think Downing Street did lay themselves open to some criticism about that in the wake of that initial announcement.
And I mean, the criticism has come from various places as well. Kemi Badenoch wrote an article in the Times that was published on Wednesday night into Thursday morning. We've had a letter from a load of peers, some of whom are quite noted legal minds, saying actually there's international law implications of the government's stance here. And then actually one of the British Israeli hostages herself, she's weighed in as well. There's been quite a lot of criticism.
Yeah, there has. Emily Damari, that British Israeli hostage who was held by Hamas for a long period of time, said that what Keir Starmer's decision was doing was sending a message that violence earns legitimacy. Kemi Badenoch saying that Keir Starmer was on the side of the terrorists. And then, as you say, 40 members of the House of Lords, 40 plus, raising concerns about the implications for international law. So what Downing Street's done is twofold. The first thing is they put a statement out on Wednesday afternoon in that they were very clear that they were saying their decision to say they would recognise a Palestinian state was about keeping the idea of a two-state solution alive, as well as trying to improve conditions on the ground in Gaza. And they were clear in that statement, and have been subsequently, that there were also demands on Hamas. For example, the hostages must be released, Hamas must lay down its weapons. And we've heard from the Prime Minister on Thursday, who was saying the position has always been that Hamas must release the hostages and couldn't have any future governance role in Gaza or, of course, in any Palestinian state. So they've had to really reiterate their position reaction on that in wake of some of the criticism that followed the approach that Downing Street took initially.
And Mike, what sort of response has Mark Carney had in Canada? I mean, it's still kind of early days in the kind of the story cycle you guys are in, because this happened in the UK earlier. But what sort of questions are being raised today?
The Israeli embassy here in Ottawa condemned it immediately. Their ambassador was on standby and on the main CBC political show moments later, talking about that. The federal conservative opposition party, they've condemned it and said it's basically rewarding Hamas. So and Jewish groups in Canada have been some Jewish groups in Canada have been quite large ones have been quite vocal in their opposition as well.
It is heating up in a similar way as it's done in the UK. Gary, you talked about the link with the trade negotiations. I mean, it's another big day for American trade policy today, the 31st of July, isn't it?
Yeah, although our sort of big bang we were expecting tomorrow or midnight tonight our time is sort of slightly evaporating in the sense that quite a lot of the stuff has started to dribble out over the last few days. We've had some extensions. Mexico's got a 3-month extension. We've obviously had the spat with Canada. Other deals have been announced in the last few days. India's still a big problem. That's a major trading partner, and that is something that Donald Trump has slapped these 25% tariffs on already. So there's a lot sort of that's already happening, and a lot will happen again tomorrow, I think. The big question is China, of course. What's going to happen with there? There's an extension of the talks until the 12th of August. That is something where everyone is particularly focused. And of course, it's worth saying that while we've got, I don't know how many it is now, 9 or 10 actual deals announced, maybe a few more, some of these, the detail on some of these isn't very clear. So we know, the UK deal is not done and dusted, is it? There's still plenty of stuff being negotiated around the edges, things that aren't finally agreed, even though there are, bits of paper with signatures on. So it's a kind of messy picture in that sense. But certainly, I think you'll see the president tomorrow, and he has already been touting this as a major success, and that people are accepting a kind of new status quo. And we saw that with the EU deal, didn't we? A kind of new status quo where there are tariffs, significantly higher tariffs than there were before, and that business will continue.
And then, Alex, though, if we talk about the UK deal, which we probably shouldn't call a trade deal because it's not a classic trade deal.
We've been around the houses with this terminology. Is it a mini trade deal? Is it a trade deal? Is it a tariff reduction deal? I mean, take your pick, really.
Also, we are in a world where it's like actually the correct words don't matter anymore. But anyway, isn't it interesting though that if we go back,
some would say,
if we go back to the Palestinian statehood thing, it's interesting that Canada, when they do it, they instantly get a tweet linking it to, a post on Truth Social, because we're using the correct words now, linking it to a trade deal. But actually, Keir Starmer can announce something quite similar on Monday and doesn't get a post on Truth Social threatening the trade deal or whatever we're calling it. Yeah,
and we also saw reaction from the US when France had made that announcement before the UK did about recognition of a Palestinian state. And the reaction from the US at that point was, really kind of fierce in response. So I think you can't, and don't get me wrong, I mean, Donald Trump did say, didn't he, when he was asked about Keir Starmer's decision to set out the path to recognition of a Palestinian state, he did say, look, that's their position. But then he went on to sort of half agree that it could be read, this notion of recognising a Palestinian state as a reward for Hamas. But he wasn't as overtly critical as he has been, or there wasn't any immediate kind of like reciprocation as there has been with Canada. And I guess that there are people in Downing Street that might put that down to the fact that Keir Starmer spent a lot of time cultivating that relationship with Donald Trump. And it was also interesting, then you have to note the timing of the announcement that Keir Starmer made on this came after he just spent pretty much a whole day with Donald Trump, like touring the golf courses of Scotland. And, they clearly spoke about Gaza during those conversations. They spoke about it publicly when they had that press conference. So I think that the reaction of the US would have been a factor that sat like very highly in the minds of Downing Street when they worked out how and when they were going to make that announcement.
And Gary, just going back to the kind of the wider picture on trade, I mean, we're all taught that business and the economy in general hates uncertainty. There's been a shed load of uncertainty for a few months now as tariffs come and go and are put up and then slashed partly, and we don't know and then there's delays. But yet the American economy looks like it's booming.
Yeah, and I think the thing we've learned is that the stock markets in particular here have started to factor in a kind of weird way, as stock markets do, this level of uncertainty. They kind of have started to assume it a little bit and build it into their calculations, which means that the swings that we saw in the early days when stuff was on and stuff was off, and that massive problem with the bond market as well, which really did worry the administration here, when there was a kind of wobble over whether or not people were going to go into US Treasuries, which is always the classic safe place that investors go, and that looked like that sort of that certainty was up for grabs earlier in the year. All that seems to have evaporated, and so there's a certain stability, even though there is this vacillation. And of course, Donald Trump is accused of this taco thing, isn't it? Trump always chickens out when it comes to it, which is also part of the calculation. Just to mention, just going back briefly to what you were talking to Alex about, it's really interesting that they really didn't go for the UK in a big way on the announcement. There was one sort of intervention from Mike Huckabee, the US ambassador in Israel, who said, France and the UK have done nothing in this conflict, etc., etc. But the criticism has been saved for Canada in particular, France, yes, but also for this conference in New York. Nothing direct against the UK. And I think, the London will and Downing Street will take that as a massive win. Now, how long and how much capital you use up in that process is difficult to know, but it's also worth, I think, remembering the Americans have been urging Europe to develop its own kind of strategic autonomy, its own kind of position in the world, its own coordinated position. Lo and behold, it's doing it, and that is something that the US may have to live with. That there will be these policy differences, these changes that put more than an ocean between them and some of their European allies on some key issues.
Now, Mike, I know you've got to go, but before you go, I've got to ask about Katy Perry going on a date with Justin Trudeau. And I know you're the policy reporter. Let's do a little bit of romance reporting. I don't know how comfortable you are with that. Sure. What do we think is going on there?
I'm really enjoying this, Adam. I'm not rushing off anywhere anytime soon, so don't worry about that. But
great, this is what I really want to do the podcast about.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the only independent reporting that I can get, policy reporting that I can give you on that, is I checked out the restaurant that they went to the night before he showed up at her concert, where he was seen in photos staring at the stage and enjoy. You can't get a reservation there until mid-August, so I don't know if that was the case before that or not, but that's one that there's something. Justin Trudeau has kind of he's disappeared, and he's become like this non-person, but he's been a part of he's been in the background of the discussions with the trade thing, because we've seen that how much Donald Trump really seems to like Mark Carney, who he calls Mark, as opposed to Trudeau, who he called Governor Trudeau. And they had a very horrible ending, and Trump has said flat out that he'd never liked Trudeau, didn't like him. I was in the White House with the two of them in 2019, and it was surreal. And a year before that, he'd blown up the Canadian G7 and called Trudeau names over Twitter. His lieutenants got on TV the next day and said there's a cold place in hell for a guy like Justin Trudeau who does this. And but he lost his marriage during the pandemic, sacrificed that for the sake of his political career, and he's clearly he's one of the Canada's most eligible bachelors. But if I was Katy Perry, I would be wondering. I don't know. I mean,
she's going to attract the ire of Donald Trump for hooking up with a loser.
My kids my daughter's like Katy Perry. I don't know. I haven't had that conversation yet. I don't know where that one goes. But it's definitely a welcome development for the news cycle in the summer to distract us and to sort of keep our eyes peeled.
And of course, Gary, this is me now plumbing your pop music knowledge. Donald Trump has got form for like attacking pop stars for political reasons. Do you remember? He used to be a Taylor Swift fan and then he stopped.
Yeah, that's right. He's laid into a few of those. I mean, politicians and pop stars don't really mix. I think we've seen that over the years, haven't we? I can't remember which Tory cabinet minister it was that got him. Was in some sort of love triangle. Do you remember with Natalie Imbruglia? I can't remember who was that now. I can't remember who that.
I don't think it was a love
Was it not?
triangle. I think they just had a friendship that was quite intense.
And so these things do blow up from time to time, and you kind of want, politicians want these endorsements. They love them, but of course sometimes they turn around. And Donald Trump had a sort of a number of different bands and stars sort of wanting to disassociate themselves from him during both of his campaigns, particularly when he was using their music during campaign rallies. There was a bit of a row about that, and of course last summer Kamala Harris really lent into the whole kind of Beyonce connection, and of course the whole kind of Charlie XCX Brat Summer thing. So they want it when they want it, but it can turn around and bite them sometimes.
Now, Alex.
Sorry, I've just been Googling Katy Perry and Justin Trudeau because that passed me by.
Oh, really? Too much domestic news, obviously, then. Focusing on the day job. Glad to hear it. But Alex, I was going to say, Jack, who's editing this episode of Newscast, just WhatsApped me saying, Wes Streeting went to Oasis the other night, but I don't think he went on a date with Noel or Liam. unless that's what you're suggesting.
No, I don't
and
think
then
there's
he's now
any
followed up with,
suggestion of
so
that.
did Robert Jenrick.
Yeah, I think there've been quite a few, haven't there, politicians? Because Lucy Powell obviously said that she got the expensive tickets to Oasis. She announced that. It's I wonder how many of them are going to pop up on their socials showing how cool they are being at 90s revival gigs. Personally,
But
I
I'm
think
just thinking
it is pretty cool.
The domestic equivalent of Justin Trudeau and Katy Perry would be
careful.
Rishi Sunak getting divorced, even though he's very, very happily married, and then being seen on a date like in Nando's with Cheryl Cole, I think. Or Kimberly Walsh.
The main thing they've all got to avoid is going to a Coldplay concert, though, right?
So true.
Indeed.
true.
Right, Gary, thank you very much.
Thanks, Adam.
Mike, great to meet you.
Take care. Lovely.
And Alex, lovely to catch up as always.
Pleasure as ever.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. Thank you very much for watching. A reminder, you can listen to our daily episodes, which sometimes have bonus material in them, by listening to Newscast on BBC Sounds. And we'll be back with another episode of Newscast for you to watch very soon. Bye-bye.